Get set, podcast listener, and be ready to win with your mentor, motivator, and marketer, Cam Roberts. Grow your business and achieve your goals quickly with the latest tips, tools, and tactics on business, success, and marketing. Subscribe now and download your free resources at camroberts.com.au.
Hey everyone, Cam Roberts here, your friend in business, success and marketing. Thank you very much for joining on another podcast show. Today's special guest is Shawn Shewchuk, and Shawn is considered the go-to person for those entrepreneurs, high achievers and leaders that are driven to achieve more and collapse time frame. Shawn's known as the productivity speaker and the number one results coach. So Shawn, thank you very much for coming on the podcast show.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, listen, I've got to jump in and ask you first and foremost is what's it like being the number one results coach, and what does that really mean?
Well, we'll start here. I've been doing this. I was a coach before there was such a thing as coaching. I had a full head of hair when I started, and so maybe that's part of it. No, I've worked with almost 11 and a half, almost 12,000, I guess now, clients over the past, well, it's been a few years now. So when I say number one of the interesting parts of this, and I've been challenged on this a couple of times over the years, there are very few people out there today, none that I'm aware of, with the exception of some that have gone before and now left us, that have had the privilege to work with as many individuals, organizations, and teams that I have. And so that's where that comes from. When you start getting into, and I was talking to someone the other day, and I share this with you, we're talking about doing a VIP day. The gentleman was flying in from somewhere in the United States to meet with me. And he said, well, how many of these have you done? And I said, well, somewhere in the thousands. So, when you get to that place, it's interesting because I can watch individuals and organizations and teams throughout Canada, United States, some in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, all of whom are in a different place today because I had the very, and I say this with humility, humble, the privilege to work with them.
Yeah, that's really good. And we'll get to your business and how you help people, obviously, but I know there's a lot of coaches and other consultants that also listen to the podcast. So can you give us some tips on what makes a great coaching program? You've been a coach for, like you said, ever since you've had hair. Now you don't have hair, right? So how did you get to that place where you've delivered thousands of these, VIP days and results for clients?
It's a really great question, and I'll kind of start from this angle. Most coaches can't afford to pay attention, never mind their bills.
Yeah,
and
right.
The word coaching or consultant or some of these are somewhat interchangeable in certain respects when it comes to the application. How I look at it is this, and I've taken a very different approach than most. I'm not a sales coach. I'm not a marketing coach. I'm not a business coach. I'm not a life coach or any one of these, I don't know, hundreds of modalities that have cropped up over the past years. At the end of the day, people and teams get into coaching or want to coach because they want to see improvement in results. Full stop. There's only one reason. And so it has to become, and for those of you who are listening or whatever, watching some of these clips or videos, think about this for a second. Your prospective clients, and there are lots of them, you may not be talking to all of them like you should be, but your prospective clients want to see something more, something better. That's why they're talking to you. And if you're going to sell, don't sell based on what you think, because what you think and this is meant with respect, is irrelevant. What's relevant is what that individual who has the pen, who can sign on the dotted line and has the credit card, what they want to experience in their team, their company, or individually. And I think we get caught up in what appeals to us, and that's not relevant. This applies even across on the marketing side. I remember having a conversation with a VP of marketing in a company one time, and he was talking about how he wanted it to look. And I said, well, is it relevant how you think or what your prospective client is going to respond to in a positive way? And I think that's an important aspect. So coaching is not about one of those modalities. Coaching, it has to be a holistic. And one of the reasons I firmly believe, among others, but that I have been as fortunate and successful as I have been, is when we start working with a client, it doesn't matter if they're one individual in a mom and pop, whatever that business happens to be down the street, or it's a Fortune 500 company or multinational, whatever it is what is the result that they want, need, desire, and especially if you're talking about individuals, what do they deserve? Because if you really start to understand what they want and need to see, if you're ethically able to help them achieve that, then how to sell them. the idea of just selling coaching by the hour, which is what most people do, puts you into the category with every other swamp donkey out there who decides one morning to call themselves a coach.
Yeah, yeah. That's really good advice. So look, let's change gears and let's talk about, the people that you work with and the businesses and companies that you work with. So look, what are some of the mistakes that you see people are making, before they come and see you? Like, obviously they come to get results, but what are they doing that's wrong or different or not getting them results before you have that conversation with them?
That's another really great question, because what happens with most individuals, and if we kind of take a look at this maybe from a 30,000 foot level, if somebody's really good at what they do, they can be a great consultant, a great plumber, a great whatever that is that they have decided at one point in time in their life was going to be their financial vehicle, their career, whatever it is. And they decide that they've been doing this for 5 years or 10 years and they want out. They don't want the boss. They've heard from somebody or they attended some event and they said, you can make millions or whatever that line was by being an entrepreneur. So they quit their job and they go and incorporate a company with whatever registering, whatever country they can, and they start doing what they're good at. And like Michael Lee Gerber says, they're doing and doing and doing,
Yep.
but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're an entrepreneur. And just because you're a good welder doesn't mean you're good at business or building a business or even the aspects of it. I have a good client of mine who happens to be a very successful accountant and bookkeeper. And her sole focus is working with these individuals, what Michael Lee Gerber calls technicians suffering from an entrepreneurial seizure, because they show up once a year, 3 days before their taxes are due to be filed with a shoebox and say, here. And that's a prime example of what we're talking about. The other side of the coin is, and I've learned from some of the best, and Dan Kennedy at one point in time, when I spent some time with him a few years ago in Cleveland, he said, 70% of your time should be invested into business generation activities. And people look at me funny when I say that to them. They're like, 70%, how do I deliver? But if you start to understand how to scale, all of a sudden it starts to make sense or fall into place. So most people aren't actually doing what they need to be doing.
Yeah.
They get up in the morning and they look at their desk or they look at their truck or whatever it is they do. And they do those things, one, where there's a fire, so they go and put the fire out. The fires likely wouldn't be there if they had done what they should have done the day prior. Or two, they do those things that they like, they thrive on. And the things they don't relish gets relegated to the back of the desk, the back of the truck, wherever it goes. And then it only gets dealt with when it turns into a fire. So you really cap yourself because you're not investing the time into those activities that are going to give you the best return.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, one of the key words you spoke about just then was the word scale. I'm wondering if you can give us three little tips on, what's the best way to scale? Someone, comes to you and they're at a point, maybe they've leveled off, for a few years, and they want to get to the next level. They want to go from 2 mil to 5 mil or 500,000 to, 1.5 million, wherever they're at. What have they got to do to get there?
Thank you for that. Number one, believe that you can do it. Most people don't. That starts here. And 50% of what I work on coaching, my background, my education, my experience is in the business realm. I've started to run 44 different companies, but you have to actually believe that you can go from 2 to 5 or whatever that difference is. That's one. Two, you cannot scale until you know what you should not be doing. And I want to say that one more time because people look at me cross-eyed when I say this. You cannot begin to scale until you know what you should not be doing.
Yeah, that's good.
And then the third thing is the productivity side. What are you doing today that is non-productive? Because you are. Every single person right now, if you were to back up and look at that 30,000 foot down, what are you doing that is not moving you in the direction of your goal or objective, which is what the description or definition of productivity is. Any action, step, or activity that moves you in the direction of your goal or objective. And the problem is we get busy. Busy doesn't equal productive. Just because your head down with the other end in the air doesn't mean you actually are moving forward or moving the needle. I remember bringing on a client a number of years ago. A husband and wife built a company from the basement in their home to, I don't know, 25 or $35 million. And they had just been engaged and they'd signed the agreement, sent it back, and we'd send welcome emails, whatever it was. And she phoned me. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening. And the wife, she said, "Shawn, you're not going to believe we had the most amazing day." I said, "Awesome. Talk to me, share with me." And she said, "Well, we worked till 5 or 5:30, and then all the staff left, and then we worked for another 4 or 5 hours." I said, "What did you do?" She says, well, we cleaned the office and we took the waste paper baskets out and we cleaned the bathrooms. I said, whoa, time out. You're a $35 million a year company. You are the president and vice president, and you're the one cleaning toilets. And I'm not saying it's beneath you, but don't you think there are activities that are higher leverage than a minimum wage activity? And she couldn't grasp this idea. I walked into their boardroom the following day, and it was 3 or 4 days before payroll, and they had 17 spreadsheets printed out, stretched across the boardroom table. I said, hey, good morning. What's going on here? She said, well, payroll's coming up. I said, well, what are the spreadsheets for? And the 3 staff that were reviewing the spreadsheets, she said, well, we have to submit this to the payroll company. I said, yeah, but we're paying 3 people to do this. She goes, no, they don't cost us anything. They're already on staff. And so when you start to talk about mistakes, and, of course, in my mind, I'm like, oh my goodness, like what have I walked into?
Yeah.
But when you start to understand this, at the end of the day, let's really get clear. If you want to scale your business, figure out what you should be doing, focus in on those high leverage activities, those things that are productive. There are lots of things that need to get done, but they don't need to get done by you. Right.
Yeah.
That's one of the keys to scaling. One of the hardest things, I built a company, one of the largest independent management consulting, the largest independent management consulting firm on the western side of this continent, and a number of years ago. And one of the toughest things that I had to do when we hired a CEO was let go. And the following morning, I walked into the office at 6 a.m. and he says, what are you doing here, Shawn? And I said, Kevin Rick goes, stay out of my way. I know what I'm doing.
It's good.
That's an ego blow for someone who's built a company a few times over to a few $1 million. But, I took it in stride, went and closed my office door and had a coffee and, shed a tear or two into the coffee. But, we went from 9 million, and 3 or 4 years later, we sold it. And the last fiscal year, we did $133 million. He did know what he was doing. And he was right. Had I stuck my nose in where it didn't belong, we wouldn't have done that. Now, don't get me wrong. We worked together and did well. But the point of this being is we as entrepreneurs, it's our baby.
Yeah.
We've built it. It's part of who we are. We treat it like one of our children. And when we have to relinquish even just a part of it, we don't want to. We fight it. And that's part of the challenge of scaling.
Yeah, that's really good. A couple of reoccurring themes there in the conversation is the word teams and people, employees. Like, how important is it to get the right teams in place? Like you with the CEO, the story you gave about the 3 people doing the payroll. How important is it to have the right team around you and to develop?
Well, I don't think I can actually, there are not words in English language to be able to actually answer that question effectively or the right way, because the people you surround yourself for everything. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I've been very fortunate and blessed to do some incredible things, meet some amazing people, work with some of the most amazing people in the world, from business, from Hollywood, recording artists, sports, NFL, CFL, NHL, all these different. But I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I have been. I had some of the best mentors. Bob Proctor was my first coach, if you know who that was, and most people will if they've been involved in coaching or personal development at some level over the last few years. And it's about surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you. Yeah, and I'm very privileged. I've got a gentleman who works in the office next to me who, this guy, when it comes to what his specialty is, he's a whiz. And and I can walk the 15 feet to his office and say, listen, we're at a place right now where we need to make a shift, and here's where we need to make it. And he'll come back to me in 24, 48 hours and say, okay, that's done. What's the next step? And I think, it's really important for us to be able to build on that. There is no way anyone can scale any business by yourself.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
And the other side of the coin is, if you don't have a pair of outside eyes that are experienced, walking hand in hand and side by side with you, you also can't do it. And that's where coaching comes in. I've had at least one coach, and sometimes more, for probably 20, well, this will date me, for about 28 years.
Yeah, that's really good.
And on December the 1st, I fly down to Dallas, Texas for 3 days with my coach. And I think the best investment anyone can make is an investment in themselves. And I don't mean in clothes or in jewelry or any of this type of thing, cars, whatever. Don't get me wrong. I like the finer things in life. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, cool.
I invest probably $150,000 a year in me, and that's not buying clothes or jewelry or cars. Don't get me wrong. I have a thing for watches, and I like nice watches, and I like nice clothes, notwithstanding a t-shirt. But the idea behind it all is that's not the focus. Right? If I'm able to improve, which I do every year, every day, every hour, that means when I get the privilege to work with a team, an individual, whoever it is, I can impart that knowledge and skill to them, and that's what makes it worthwhile from a coaching standpoint for them.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. Now, you spoke about some high level names there that many people know, including myself, Dan Kennedy, Bob Proctor, people like that. How does someone know, maybe they don't have a coach right now. So how do they know that they're picking the right coach or the right mentor? Because there's a lot of people out there that call themselves coaches these days.
Yeah, you and I were chatting about this earlier, and it's a great question. I don't know that there's a surefire way to. It's like hiring staff. Like we have a process we go through when we hire leadership folks for our team or teams, different companies or things that I'm involved in. And we have a process where that even we call their former boss on a conference call and say, okay, tell me something. How was this individual when they worked for you? And if that individual who's applying for that position doesn't want you to talk to the former boss, there might be some questions that they're not answering or they're not wanting to discuss. So going to the coach side of things, listen, at the end of the day, if you're going to base it on Google reviews, you're going to fail miserably. Right. Because those can be easily manipulated.
Yeah.
The happiest place on earth, which apparently is Disneyland, even has negative reviews. Right. So let's not base our decision on something that is easily manipulated. Yeah, I think one of the keys is trust. And one of the things I talk about a great deal, and I teach and I speak about a lot, I write about it, is building strong, powerful, high trust relationships. And that's really a key. My wife and I were having a conversation about something the other day, and we needed to put new tires. And I know that, you guys down under don't necessarily get some of the weather we get, but here we have to put special tires on in the wintertime for snow. Yeah. And I phoned this guy, and she says, how come you always phone the same person? I said, you know what? It's trust. I've been dealing with them for, 15 years or whatever it is. And she says, well, have you ever shopped them? I said, no. So she took the price, and of course she made a couple phone calls. She goes, they're 10% less than everyone else. I said, see, and I think that's the key behind this. Yep. is building that relationship. I have people, especially when I speak and I come off a stage and there's a lineup of people, and they'll say to me, Shawn, like, I want to do big deals. I want to do the 6-figure, 7-figure deals, whatever they are, whatever business they're in. And one of the things I think we need to really get clear on, and the pandemic didn't do us any favors in this respect. Those big deals don't happen on Facebook or on Craigslist or any one of those, those type of classified websites. You can't put an ad out on Craigslist, or in Canada, we have something called Kijiji, the same sort of idea. You can't put an ad out saying, hey, I want someone to help me out and invest $1 million in my project. No one's going to respond. Those type of business deals don't come from sitting down over $1.25 coffee. They come from strong, powerful, high trust relationships. They're done over a glass of wine, a cup of coffee, not one, dinner. Yeah. This is where those types of deals happen. So if there's someone, even coaching, you want to land a big client, you want to work with a leadership team in a multinational company, a Fortune 500, whatever it is, it's not going to happen with that type of an approach. It comes from you putting yourself in the right place. I always say to people, put yourself in the way of the right person. And people smile at me and go, well, that's pretty presumptuous of you. Well, you can call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, a lot of the folks I've had the privilege to work with, both from a mentorship standpoint to help me, as well as the folks that I've worked with from a client standpoint that I've served, has come from me putting myself in their way. Now, I don't mean that literally where I put my hand in their face and said, stop, but it was where our paths would cross. And I think that's a big part. A lot of people have, more so maybe over the last 2 or 3 years, this challenge about interaction with other human beings. Right. And I'm not going to go down any political roads over this, but I do want to say this. The idea of a handshake and a business deal is not going away, at least probably not in my lifetime.
That's right. I agree. So, like you spoke about some political issues there, and you touched on the pandemic, which is one of the questions I wanted to ask you. With your experience in business and the 20 or 30 odd years that you've been around businesses, do you see the landscape changing at all over the next 5 or 10 years? What's happening that's going to make business operate differently or present different opportunities?
Yeah, something, I think business has changed, and it's based upon how we interact. And if you think back, to 2020 and most countries around the world, we were locked into our own homes, some more than others. And again, I'm not going down this road, whether it was justified or unjustified, but it still was there. I remember having a conversation with somebody back in 2021, a gentleman out of the UK in London, and he wasn't allowed to leave the sidewalk in front of his house in whatever area, whoever the ruling came from, the around the pandemic.
Yep.
I think that's a challenge. Now maybe at the time it was necessary, someone deemed it necessary, and who am I to judge them? But how we interact has changed, and that is going to change business. What's also going to change is technology as we move forward. And so our delivery mechanisms have to change at some level, and we have to be responsive, not reactive. And a lot of people who are in business today and have been in business for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, they're stuck in a rut.
Yeah.
And very simply put, they don't want to make a shift and a change. And 2020 was probably, I'm going to say, the world shut down. I think it was March 15th of 2020. It was probably May of 2020. I was on a phone call with a lawyer off the West Coast here in North America. And I'd known this guy a little while. And he said, Shawn, I found the most amazing tool. And I said, what's that? He goes, man, I wish I'd known about this. Or no, I wish it existed years ago. And I said, well, what is it? He goes, Zoom. I said, I've had a Zoom account for probably 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
It existed before COVID. I said, yeah. So, a lot of us, he still has a fax machine, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So a lot of us get caught up in what we know, and the world, as much as we may not want to admit it, the world tends to leave us behind. And if you want an example of this, if you have young children or someone that does, spend some time with those kids and see how you feel after 3 or 4 hours when they're talking to you, what is English, but a completely different language.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Excellent. Well, Shawn, we're almost out of time, but before we wrap up, if people want to learn more about your business, working with you, listen to you speak, how can they connect with you? Where can they find you on the internet?
Anywhere on social media. All you have to do is punch in my name, or you can go to changeyourresults.com, or you can go to our store at highproductivitystore.com and get some. You can see some stuff over my shoulder here, books, and I did a planner and a journal and a whole bunch of things to help with productivity, which we were talking about a moment ago. You go check it out.
Excellent. We'll make sure we put all of those links and show notes in the show notes. Shawn, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.